Tanik, first of all, thank you so much. Really means a lot for removing time for the students of Indian Collegiate Startup Week. As you know, it's an inaugural edition. The kind of questions that the students have asked have been very rudimentary and basic, but they're very important for them to start a career related to a startup. And no one knows it better than you, who has spent multiple years in very hallowed institutions, and now you're a co-founder of one of the most dynamic startups in the sports space, FanCode. So welcome to Indian Collegiate Startup Week, and the first question posed by our students is, what is the advice you will give young college students about getting their first startup going?
Thanks for having me on this. It's a pleasure, Shell. And I think I'm a little bit different from a lot of the people who are in the audience because I'm a late stage entrepreneur, right? I worked with corporate, and I like to think I benefited a lot from that exposure also before I actually started a startup. But I think the advice that was always given to me, not just now, but even earlier when I worked in different corporates at different levels of evolution of their business, was whenever you're starting something, right, there are three main questions irrespective of what you start. First, the first most important thing is, what problem are you solving for? Right? What is the one problem or the multiple problems that you're solving for to make something better? Right? The second is who are you solving for that problem for? And the third is how. So I think when you start looking at these three aspects, essentially everything your business builds, from your the concept of your startup to what the scale of it could be, all depends on these, and to how what your business plan is essentially depends on answering these three questions, I would think.
Wonderful. It's simple and it's so lucid. Very well explained. Thank you. The second question, Yannick, is 2 top learnings that you have had personally in your startup journey.
Yeah, so I think, again, for me, I'm a late stage entrepreneur, so some of the learnings that I've had are probably not completely applicable to people starting up, very early in their career. So one of the things I think that most startups, one of the biggest learnings that I've had, and I think a lot of people would have anyway, is that it is extremely, you have to go into what you're doing accepting that you're not going to know a lot about what you're going to do. I think that's really important, because if you go, you can build the best business plan, do most amount of research, do everything you want. And when you actually go on, if you don't go with an open mind saying that, I may have to change, I may be wrong, I may have to pivot multiple times. If you don't go with that agility and flexibility of mind, I think that you're destined for failure. And not just from my perspective, but a lot of young entrepreneurs I've spoken about, everyone says exactly the same thing. Almost 100% of them have not essentially built what they originally set up to do. But so you have to be agile. And I think the second thing is for everyone, right, in the sense that starting this essentially takes everything you have, right? It's part of your life. So you have to be passionate about it. It has to be something you believe in and that you intrinsically have a passion. So when you talk about solving problems, right, it should be a problem you want solved. It shouldn't be a problem saying that I'm solving this because there's lots of money in it. Because this is going to consume you. This is going to be a part of your entire life, and how much you decide that you kind of figure out. But over your next, for you to be successful, it's going to be a part of your life. So if it's not something that you're passionate about and you believe in, you're going to struggle to be successful in it.
I think just listening to you speak on this brings one more question to mind, that the space that you've been in has been sports.
Right.
And there must be learnings in the sports industry which are very industry specific.
Yeah.
At the same time, there must be some learnings, especially with leadership and managing people, which must be pan industries. Is there anything in managing people in your years at Nimbus or in IMG that you have brought into this particular role?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that I've used from what I've experienced, and there's a lot of stuff I've had to unlearn also. So I think a lot of stuff from what I've experienced has been just in terms of, whenever you work with any organization, you're always learning. And when in the businesses that we are in, which are consumer facing, you're essentially learning a lot about people, because that's really what the nuts and bolts of everything we do is people, right? Everything else is around that. So I think learning around people, learning how to deal with people, learning how to be empathetic about various people having various challenges, I think that's something that was tremendous for me in terms of learning, and I think that's really helped me even in my stint with the MBA, like learning to deal with diverse types of people, different thinkings across geographies, I think really helped me. I think what I had to unlearn was that I've never really worked with significant amount of people in the engineering space, right? It's been largely sales, largely events, largely operation, largely marketing driven. So I think there's unlearning some of the, not stereotypes, but some of the things that work for a certain number of people, some people work for. I think understanding that diverse sets of people require different sets of management, and some of the concepts that you have in terms of what hard work means, what efficient work means, I think that had to evolve a lot. And I think that's really, I've kind of evolved a lot in that kind of thinking in the last 3 years.
That's really helpful. And I think it dovetails with your agile framework and approach towards this work. The third question which we get asked a lot by students is, how important is it for founders to have co-founders?
Right. So I think with everything, right, in a startup, I think having co-founders, and I mean the word co-founders is essentially isn't clear. I think having a set of people who you can bounce ideas off, especially at an early stage, having other people who you can trust to do things and be able to focus on, you can kind of focus on specific areas, and having someone else and having other people who will call you out, right? Because sometimes you get into groupthink, you keep thinking about stuff and you're so focused, you're so obsessed with it that you're not able to step back and look at things. I think that's really important, whether it comes in the form of a founder or co-founder, whether it comes in the form of a mentor, whether it comes in form of a board, or whether it comes in the form of a combination of things. I think it's really important that as you, in any business that you run, to be able to have people around you who will provide perspective, which you will lose because you're so obsessed and you will become so passionate about what you're trying to solve for that you will lose perspective, and you need people who are around you, aren't afraid to call out BS. Right, and say, look at this. So I think that's really, aside from responsibility sharing, I think challenging you and getting you to constantly relook at stuff, I think that's really important.
And for that same approach, in a college scenario,
right,
you have probably classmates who have identified a need and want to work together. How important would be paperwork to make sure that the stakes or ownership is documented at an early stage? How important do you think that is?
I think, listen, paperwork is really important, right? I think, and there are various learnings of various. You obviously have to trust people, but if you don't trust people, you can't work with them. But it's like a will, right? It's like when I keep telling everyone that if you have children, always make a will, right? Because even though you expect that everyone will get along harmoniously, why leave it to chance? So I would think paperwork is really important, and paperwork doesn't mean lack of trust. I don't think people should look at why do you need to document this? You don't trust me. I don't think so, not at all. It just puts in writing and makes sure that there's no ambiguity. It clearly articulates what each person is doing, and then there is also, things change, right? So when things change, you can re-articulate that, but it's there in one place, and I think that's really important.
That's very helpful. What advice would you give on finding seed funding to these young fledgling companies?
Right. So I would like to, everyone's obsessed with funding, right? I think you have to be very clear what you want funding for. I would actually advise most startups, especially early stage entrepreneurs, right, to bootstrap your way through building a business or building products or create proof of concepts. Because seed funding sounds great, valuation sounds great, but there are lots of responsibilities which come in taking someone else's money. And I would say that if you are looking to, if you're doing the same, if you're starting a business to solve a problem that you've identified the people you want to solve the problem for, and you know how you want to do it, try and figure out as much as you can do with as little capital as possible. And then essentially funding should be used, your proof of concept you should try to do with as little funding as possible. And funding you should really use to, once you've built your business, to say like, or you build your concept to say, I need to scale this, right? And I need to scale this rapidly. That's what I need money for. I think the biggest mistake anyone can make is like say that funding is, the concept of like, I want to put a press release saying that I got so much funding. There's nothing in that. Funding should be about your business and should be about helping you solve that problem that you wanted to set on a scale and building a successful business. So I would say be very, very careful about when you go in for funding. I think be very clear as to what you want the money for, how you want to use it, and when do you need it. And I think at different stages of your building your business, try and figure out how you can bootstrap and build your proof of concept before you actually go out into the market and try and pick up money.
When I listen to you speak, this thought occurs in my mind that it is but natural for students to mimic what's happening in the corporate world of funding or private equity investment. So what would be a cautionary a bullet point or bullet points that you can share with them, that if you take money from an angel investor or private equity firm, the top 2-3 things which are definitely going to happen will be these?
So I think, think about when you take someone's money, you have a responsibility to that person. First of all, that person owns part of your company. So I'm very, very particular about it, in my mind at least. If you believe in something which you're building, your problem you're solving, you figure out who you build your business plan and stuff around it, for me to give someone a part of ownership of that is a big deal. That it's not just about the money, I need to make sure that person has the same values that I have, has the same vision, supports that. So that's really important. Just don't think that when you're getting in money, that it's about, someone giving me money so that, I get valuation stuff. Because that's going to be your partner. That person is going to be a co-owner, then they own 1%, 2%, 3%. And you have a responsibility to that co-owner, that it's much more. So I would say the most important thing is it's not just about the money, it's about who's giving it to you. So be very, very cautious about that, and don't get obsessed with this, this thing about valuation. And if you are building a business to sell it, don't build it, right? You have to build a business because you believe in it. The option of you making money because someone has valued this, because you solved the problem and you're getting some form of liquidity, that's a bonus, right? And that's something which obviously everyone wants to make money. But if you're building a business saying, I'm trying to figure out, now I'm going to build it, I'm going to get funding, and then I'm going to sell it, then you're not building a business to solve a problem. You're building a business, essentially I wouldn't advise anyone to build a business to sell. Build it because you believe you can add value to someone's life or to solve some problem, and build it because you're passionate about it.
Yanni, one last question from the students that we have. Any golden words of wisdom on how should someone choose a startup idea?
Right.
Because this confuses some youngsters a lot.
Yeah, I don't choose a startup idea. You have to you go back to the first thing I said, right? It should be a problem you're trying to solve for, right? It should be a problem you're trying to solve for, and it should be something you're passionate about. Like for me, I mean, in a much smaller concept, right? It took me years to figure out that I wanted to solve it, but the problem I was trying to solve for is that the experience for sports fans and following their favorite sport was screwed up. And I wanted to say how, I want to try and solve for how do I solve this for myself? And I know there are lots of other people around me who have the same problem. So I would say that if you want to start up something, it should be something, the problem you're solving for should be something you're passionate about. It should, and it's something that you identify with, or something that you at least understand. Because if you're going to start up and or do a startup on the sake of saying, listen, I need to do a startup, I need to find a business case for a startup, you have no chance. Because again, like when everyone talks about companies get funding, whatever it is, I was reading somewhere that about 95% of startups in Silicon Valley don't make it past the $100 million mark, right? So for every successful story you heard, there are 10 others who have failed. So you have to be focused on what you are doing, and you have to be passionate about it, because it is going to consume your life. So build it because it's something you believe in.
Listening to many of our college students, because some of them are heavily steeped into sports.
Right.
Would it be possible for you to share just a little bit of how the fan code story has evolved?
Right.
You just mentioned about the need that you were solving, but what is the vision, and how do you see it making a difference to the consumer experience?
Yeah, so you go back to the problem we're trying to solve for. We have essentially two problems. One is that the experience for sports fans, not just in India but globally, in following their favorite sport is very linear. It's one-dimensional. It is fragmented, so the experience is broken. That's one problem. The second problem we're trying to solve is the access to content in sport for sports fans outside of the top level of events like IPL and stuff like that. So when we said we wanted to solve these two problems for that same consumer, we essentially started building a product around that. And we've already done, I think, more than 1,000 matches of tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 women's cricket, under 19 cricket. So I think, and we've got tremendous response on that already. We already have a user base. Our unique user base has already crossed 50 million people. So we've obviously figured that there is enough traction as we continue to scale up, right? And we are continuing to kind of build that product to solve those problems. And we, our goal is to be the largest sports fan platform first in India, and then take this globally, because this is a similar problem that we believe that lots of sports fans have across the world. And the beauty about technology is that you're able to you're able to export that the user experience and the architecture and the framework across multiple geographies with limited additional overhead. So
it's really helpful. And Yannick, just for the students who are pursuing their engineering in computer science or MSc and IT courses, what would be your advice on how to approach their career? Because you employ so many computer engineering and programmers.
Right.
So what would be your advice to them on how to approach, say, their first job out of college, or maybe internships that they do in their final years?
I think and again, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a technologist, but this is the feedback I always get, right? It has to be about, I think, in the early stages of when you come out of college and as a software developer, whether it's a front-end engineer, back-end engineer, whatever it is, right? I think it's a lot about learning. Yeah? So it's a lot about working for a company which is able to give you that space where you can learn a lot. A lot of large companies have got very siloed kind of approaches. So whereas you have stability and you have brand and stuff, but your job is predetermined. So I think it also depends on the appetite you have to grow. Right, there's some amazing global technology companies, but if you were to join them as a young engineer, like everything else, your jobs will be pretty predetermined, and you'll have stages of evolution within that. I think joining slightly early stage Series A companies, things like that, will allow you a lot more flexibility. And I think who you're working with, what the engineers you're working with, who's going to be and the kind of products you're building, I think that's something that you need to have some comfort. So spend more time in trying to understand what your role is going to be and what are you going to be ultimately contributing to, and less time, I think, focusing on brand.
Yannick, for someone who hires hundreds of programmers, this is very valuable advice. And I think I've asked all the questions that the students had put forth. If there's any lasting message you want to give to our audience and then the viewers, then please do so. But from our side, we just want to thank you immensely for your time and this generosity of sharing your knowledge base. You are amongst the forerunners in a space which is evolving and changing quickly. And it just helps students understand that there is always going to be a career around the corner which you can join, but a startup phase is something which you should get in as quickly as possible, because you're building something not for others but for yourself. You're helping your own vision. So last, any message you would like to give to our viewers?
No, I think it's, if you're, it's pretty much the same thing. I would say, it's great to have the ambition, and I think the environment now is really, really set up to facilitate young entrepreneurs, right? Especially with the penetration of, just internet penetration and the accessibility to it. So I think the opportunity is there, but I think you need to, and I think the good thing about doing this early is that, you have no fear. I think you should be doing stuff which is fearless, and be more focused about what you're solving for and how you're solving it, rather than focused on, is this going to be $1 billion idea, right? If you are able to do what you set out to do, you're going to deliver, you're going to be successful. Okay.
I think on behalf of all of us at the Indian Collegiate Startup Week, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank